Good morning. This is the morning after I did the video on the beach where we were discussing why didn't I do what B.J. Palmer did. He said the last 20 years of his life he only adjusted the top two vertebrae, and I tried to demonstrate how the top two vertebrae were the most important vertebrae of the spine. So why did I go to the rest of the spine? And after I did the trip to Spartanburg to see Dr. Kale, it took 3 days, the miraculous 3 days, to me walking. I couldn't walk when I got there, and he's adjusting my upper cervical. It was a left atlas. And that hospital, he had a hospital there in Spartanburg. Dr. Kale had a chiropractic hospital, very nice. And that's where I stayed, in this hospital. And he focused on that left atlas, and in 3 days, I can still remember waking up in the bed thinking, unbelievable. Tension was gone from the lower back. And that's what a lot of you get, that lower back pain, and you think, why would I go to an upper cervical chiropractor who's just going to work on the atlas? And B.J. Palmer, the smartest chiropractor ever made, and he's only adjusting the top two vertebrae the last 20 years of his life. And of course, the son came along, David Daniel came along in the 60s, and when B.J. died, he opened the school back up to full spine education, where during B.J. Palmer's lifetime, he had stopped the adjusting of the C3 on down. They call occiput C0, so it was really 3 segments, C0, C1, and C2. Well, that was the quandary, and chiropractic colleges across the country started up because of that, because they did full spine. That's what people wanted to go learn. And the Palmer College in Davenport, Iowa, was only teaching the upper vertebrae. It was cool. They had tires, like car tires, and they cut them into sections like that big, around, you cut maybe 8 sections or 5 sections out of a tire, and then they would put that down on the bench. And remember, I told you that we had to work on this thrust type motion. And they basically, the doctors just sat there or stood there, bent over to adjust somebody in a knee chest position. And they thrusted on this rubber, the tire flexed into the table. And that's what the exercise was, to exercise these triceps muscles to deliver a thrust. That was the way he had his students. We have a video of that somewhere too, we'll put up. But they just adjusted and learned to adjust with the muscles that did that. Well, I thought, once I had to figure out, well, how does that work? So now, and they're not telling you, there was no book. B.J. Palmer wouldn't come out and do a lecture on how upper cervical. He never did that. He just had to do it. And that, that kind of stuff always bothers me. So I don't know, just through time and doing upper cervical, I said, I think I'm smarter than everybody else, right? I'm thinking, I know how this works. It's like a steering wheel. So the atlas and axis, as you can see in my head, is off to the left, because I told you I had a left atlas, and I always will have a left atlas. It never really changes. Once the x-rays are drawn on and they come up with what your listing is, and I think I've heard Dr. Ed talk about when he used to see me use the 2-point gliding system and to affect a pattern of a patient's neck. So when you first come in, you get a reading with this thermoscribe, it was called. And that's what Ed remembers. Dr. Ed remembers seeing me working my thermoscribe up people's neck. It was the very specific way to do things. And it developed, the line would go up and do a little joggle like that. So that's my pattern. You see, every time I saw, so if the ink went up like that and then did that, you wouldn't adjust the patient at that point. You would say, give me your fee. You would charge for the fee for the visit. And then you'd say, I'll see you tomorrow or the next day or whatever it is. And you look for that joggle of the pen, and it would be called the pattern. So Dr. Ed mentioned that since the probes are on both sides, these guys were sharp. These guys weren't stupid. These guys were sharp. I slipped the name of the fellow who invented the thermoscribe. And you looked for that pattern, whether it be side to side or up and down. You looked for that pattern, which is reproducible. And when you saw that pattern, that's when you adjusted the patient. And you might see them for 10, 15 times. And if you don't see that pattern, you didn't touch them. It's quite extraordinary what he had come up with. And I still think it's valid. I'm not going to do it because I want to do the full spine. I just wanted to work on the whole body. It's like having somebody come in and say, just work on the radio in the car. I didn't want to just work on the radio. So it seemed palatable to the patients. So I said, you do the steering wheel. I stopped looking for the pattern. I don't know. Do I think I'm better than BJ Palmer? I don't know. I got frustrated looking for the patterns. People come in, pay the fee, adjustment fee, and not get adjusted. It was difficult to follow the prescription that BJ taught. It was very difficult. And I just chose not to follow it. My figuring out was that the head was like a steering wheel. So you can see my head moves to the left. It jostles the body to the left. And that's why I probably have more trouble with my left side, because you can see it tilts you into the distorted posture to deal with a crooked head. And I had to come up with an explanation for myself. And my explanation was that you live in your head. You don't live in your foot or your knee or your hand. You're living in this little box up here at the top of your shoulders. And your body carries that around. It carries around your little head where you live. And that head has to be level. I went to the mall last year and I sat on the second story of the UTC mall looking down at everybody walking down the mall. I think it's fascinating. I've never heard anybody give a talk like this. It seems so obvious. What are all the heads doing when they're walking down the mall? They're level. The heads are all level. Now the feet are going, the toes are flaring out, the hips are over to the side, and they walk. And that's one of my fascinating things I do every day when I'm around people. I look at their walk and how they distort, trying to keep their head level. Because you have gyroscopics in your ear, right? The semicircular canals, and your eyes need to be level, otherwise you'll get dizzy. You'll get a dizzy feeling. If your eyes are doing one thing and your semicircular canals are doing another one, they call that vertigo. So you get vertigo and you have this disruption in your ability to walk because you just feel like you're all crooked. So I on the second floor of the UTC mall looking down at everybody, and all the heads are coming down the mall level. The feet are doing all kind of weird things. I can tell what that foot flare that somebody does when your head is tilted and turned, right? They're walking with that one foot turned out. Isn't that going to affect the inside of the knee? And so every time they walk, they're doing this with their knee instead of doing a straight bend. How many directions can the knee move? One, basically forward and back, forward and back. And I love talking about the knee because the kneecap's in there, and we're going to do that too. My seesaw analogy to the knee. It was a real good explanation about the knee I saw the other day on YouTube. But it's really like a seesaw. And the kneecap is the pivot. And we're going to talk about what happens when you move that seesaw point up and down on the knee. Remind me of that to get into that. So anyway, I decided that if I loosened up the lower body, because the vertebrae, when you look at C5, I was going to show an x-ray of it. I will show an x-ray of it. And you'll see C1, 2, 3. This is fascinating, guys. You can do it. Chiropractors, whatever. But C1, 2, 3, or C0, 1, 2, 3 is usually looks brand new, like it's a baby. It looks perfectly brand new. You do see, disc degeneration at the upper cervical, but usually all of it's at C5. And that's why it's amazing to me to have the degeneration at C5. And I don't call it degeneration, I call it regeneration. Wait, yes, but there's more calcium in there than there was at birth. The body regenerates. The body's trying to regenerate. And I remember, what was the guy's name? Years ago, they took and put what the body was doing to C5 and put it in a computer program and worked it out to like 25 or 30 years. What was the body doing to C5 with all this calcium, taking the disc out? And I said to myself, that's making the C5 into C2. It's trying to take there's no disc at C1, 2. There's no disc at C, it was trying to say no disc at C5, 6. So it takes the disc out of C5, 6, makes it bone on bone. Atlas is bone on bone. So C5 is now bone on bone, and I bet you if you could live long enough, it would make that C5 into a imitation of C1 too, with a pin type movement and the atlas moving on that, and you just have bone on bone is perfectly aligned and accurate. You keep your head level. So it's not, I get tired of saying to, oh, you bad, stupid body, you degenerated that C5, and that's why we're having trouble down the arm. It will, if you give it long enough, it will deposit calcium here, take calcium away from here, and you'll end up with a atlas-looking joint. But nobody lives long enough, right? They get to be about 95, 105 years of age, and we die before. Was it Dr. Nikito that had that? Maybe somebody can tell me what that was. I think it was about 20 years ago, and I remember sitting in class and just he had weekend courses of work, and he had a program that took what the body was doing, the algorithm of what it was doing, and I said to myself, it's making it into atlas and axis. And I'm just a young student. I raised my hand. Same thing with telling the doctor I went to, the seminar I went to him in the break, and said, you say the neck is straight and the head's forward. Is it possible that the straightness of the neck is to make a pole out of the atlas, the C5, so this neck spins instead of, because the atlas spinner, the atlas and axis, is stuck. That's why it's brand new. It doesn't move. It moves just enough, get some blood in there, keep it healthy, but it doesn't wear out like you're seeing that C5. And C5 is not meant to move, like I said, at somewhere around 50 degrees over here. That's supposed to be C5's job right there. This is C1, 2, all the way to 45 degrees. Now at 46 degrees, C3 kicks in for about 5 degrees. And then C4, 5 more degrees, and it goes on down the neck, boop, 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 boop. But as you get down to 5, you can't turn a curved neck. You can't turn a lordotic neck. So the body simply pulls it into here, the neck straightens and becomes a stick, and now you can turn, and the body goes, okay, well, we're just gonna leave it there. I'm not gonna take it back into a curve, because he's just gonna ask me in a couple seconds to turn my head and straighten my neck. So I'm gonna leave it in the straight position, military neck, pressure on C5, more than was designed into the system. And that's why you take a picture of anybody out there, get your lateral x-rays out, and you're gonna see C5 and 6 degenerative. And they're not degenerative, it's regenerative. It's building C5 and 6 to look like a spinner, which means you gotta take the disc out of there, get rid of the cushioning disc, straighten the neck into a stick, which means all the, Dr. Pierce, what was it, about 35 years ago, he was up in Altamont Springs, Dr. Pierce, still wagging, you've heard of that technique. And these guys, I would go to their seminars and I'd say, we're putting a patient face down on a drop table, and he had us put our thenar into the C5 vertebrae and set the table, and boom, boom, and bang, like you're hammering out a dent in a car. He'd have us banging the curve into the patient's neck. And I'd say, that's going to put the curve, because it made sense. Bang, put the curve, get the patient's neck is straight. So you come back here and bang on C5, bang, 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 and you put the curve back in there. But as soon as the patient turns his head, it's going to request C5 to work, and it's going to straighten it out, being a military straight neck, to turn the head. And then eventually it's going to say, hey, get that C5 disc out of there. So it ruptures, the disc ruptures, because the body's taking it out. There's about 7 rings, like an onion, in that C5 disc. And it goes through and it wears out the disc. The C5 disc gets flatter, and it turns it into a bone-on-bone situation. That's not pathological. In innate wisdom, we call it innate, I-N-N-A-T-E. We think of it as the program that God put into the body to keep the head level and to move this body and modify the body. And that's what a lot of you're seeing when you see a patient. That's probably what BJ thought. The people are coming in here with modifications that are innate prescribed. So we have changes in the way the patients, that's a change to keep the eyes level and the ears level. You call it a bad posture, yes, but it's what the body needs, because it can't, the atlas is stuck, so it has to do these things to get the eyes and ears to agree and level and go down the mall. That's the way you carry your head, level. I hope this is making a lot of sense. I'm trying to slow my talk down. So we have a straight neck regenerating the C5 and 6 to mimic the turning vertebrae. So we come up and we adjust or turn the upper cervical vertebrae so it moves better again, or to do it more specifically, as BJ called it, upper cervical specific. He didn't call it upper cervical general. He was very specifically trying to align that atlas like a steering wheel. You're driving your car to park the car, and he wanted that atlas right under the head. And that's where he did an adjustment analyzed by the x-ray. And it was just a little bit too, then we had the alignment of the x-ray machine to consider. It was just too specific for a non-digital world. And now there's not many people even interested in doing it. So I don't know whether it would work today. It probably would work in the digital world better. But back then we came up with, oh look, the atlas is to the left, it's spun, it's anterior. We would use, if it's turned anterior, we would call that anterior. So we come up with these letter systems. AS, it usually always went AS, which means anterior superior. Very rarely did you have an atlas that was like toward the ground. So it was AS, then you had left or right, ASL, and then you had to tell whatever that side that went L, was it A or P? And you come up with my number, digital was ASLA. ASL, and then the atlas transverse went forward A. And that was how you put the patient down, and you tried to do all that in one quick move to affect the proprioceptors to bring the atlas back into alignment under the skull. And the problem is, of course, you have the condyles, right? The condyles that on the atlas and the receiving condyles on the occiput, and they develop this way. Now, that person will always have an ASL. Can you see how the vertebrae is going to slide down this slope and over across that slope? So now we have a person who has a permanent ASL because the condyles hardened usually around 11, 12 years of age. This person would be an ASR. Can you see how the atlas would slide, to the right, because it's got a steep cliff here and a flatness over here. And you never could change that. And that was very frustrating to me. So the idea to me was to at least do upper cervical work, and we do. You watch Dr. Ed, Dr. Brenda, Dr. Max, and you can see them. They don't really know it maybe, but they probably were going to say they do. But they're working upper cervical because they're going to take and break down that upper cervical using their hands up against the occiput, trying to get that condylar stiction gone. So now you have the atlas free at least, because the medulla, they found out B.J. Palmer, that's another story. B.J. Palmer had to go around the world to dissect people as close to death as possible. It's a little bit scary, and that was the accusation. He wanted, because at the time we didn't have CAT scans and MRIs specifically, to see where the medulla was. Because he said the medulla is inside the ring of the atlas and axis. And I'm sure this is going to even stir up this conversation here on this video. And he tried to go around the world, who knows where, I'm just making it up, China, someplace where they're not monitoring death. You're not allowed to go in and dissect on people in American hospital. So he would go, with part of what he did with Ringling and traveling the world was to see people that he could try to get in there as close to death to see where the medulla was. And he came up with the medulla shrinks almost immediately as soon as death occurs. And that's why on dissection of a 4-day-old cadaver, the medulla would be above the ring of the atlas. And they would say, see, you're not messing with the medulla, BJ. And he would and he documented that before death, the medulla went down into the ring of the atlas. And that's why it was so important to get the pressure off the medulla oblongata with that atlas adjustment of his. And that's part of his mission of traveling the world, to get documentation of where the medulla was. So that's the kind of thing we're looking at. Because if it's affecting the medulla, there's going to be more of a reaction to the posture than there would be if it's just sitting up inside the skull, protected by the skull. And that was a big discussion back in the 30s or whatever. They went around trying to decide where the medulla was. And we'll talk about this more as we go further in these discussions. I'll stop there. I'm getting a little hoarse, and I'm sorry I can't talk more or slower. If you need me to talk slower, let me know, or faster. I know nowadays people want a quick anecdote or whatever, but there's just so much to discuss here. I've discussed it with people all through my decision to come full spine, and even the activator. I did the activator just like Dr. Furr just prescribed it. I bought the tables. He said you had to have the tables because he wanted you to stand up lying down. You're not supposed to crawl on the table and then do a leg check. You're supposed to be on the table and it comes down and you're standing up lying down. And the doctor observes the leg difference. And that's why I stopped it. I was looking down at this leg check all day long. It was just killing me. But I remember those were the busiest days of my life. I don't know, upwards, and we had 80 people one day. I said, 80? How did I do that? And my sister's working for me, and she's like, what are you doing? 80 people, you're nuts. But that's what people love the activator, and we still use the activator. It's very good, but it's, again, if you're gonna do these techniques, you have to do it from thermoscribe to leg check. Whatever the people that invented this thing, and that's why I'm sure they're frustrated, because people just say, lie down on your stomach on this table. And you can't crawl on the table and then do an activator leg check. It's not the right way. An activator is very powerful. Again, it's working on the proprioceptive centers in the skull. I mentioned those before. There's a little hologram of you in your cerebellum, and that is where the distortions are. And every joint sends a signal, a proprioceptive signal, to the cerebellum, and that's what you're changing. And I still feel that we need to work on that. I don't know why I want to work on that. That someday there'll be like a computer, and you'll attach it to the cerebellum, and somehow, if we can have a phone that's going to affect the brain, we certainly can come up with something to affect the cerebellum, and we can change, trying to change where we carry our head. If we could affect that with now we do it by talking to the cerebellum. We think we're an activator, we think we're adjusting the vertebrae. Oh, look, I moved that vertebrae. That little activator's not moving that vertebrae, even though they will yell at me here and tell me it does. And it might move it a little bit, I'm sure, especially in younger children and so forth. But that vertebrae is going to grow into those condyles. There's facets between each vertebrae, and that's what you're fighting when you're trying to change that posture. But the XYZ coordinate system for that hologram in your cerebellum is in your brain. And if we could affect that XYZ system electronically, I don't know, I'm dreaming. But that's the purpose of the activator, purpose of the adjustment. When you do an adjustment, you're doing a thrust, and hopefully the patient's in like the mirror image of the distortion when you deliver that thrust. If any chiropractors are watching, that's what I would watch out for. If you have a patient all twisted and now you're gonna put a thrust in, you're inducing that posture in the cerebellum. And that needs to be taken into consideration. I try to get my students to keep the patient in some semblance of the mirror image. So if their head's like that, before you deliver the thrust, you want them like that. Or if their head is like that on the table, I'll raise the headpiece up to bring it back. And I remember one fellow, he's passed now, Carl Tabor, lovely man. And he would say to me after he got off the activator table, Dr. Bo, my cheeks are killing me. And I'd say, what? So the activator table that you buy and use has a slope to that headpiece. And I'm sure when they invented that, they wanted, Dr. Kent, was involved in that? Dr. Kent, that you want the head at least in retro. Negative Z, this is positive Z, negative Z. You want that at a negative ZX so that the patient's head is like this as you're delivering those pulses. And if you just did that, if all 80 people came in and I just put them on the table with their head pushed back and then went click, 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 I bet you it would enact relief. Because that's what I felt like everybody was getting, at least through my activator analysis with the leg check. It was giving me where to go and what to do. It always seemed a little interesting to me how they came up with those tests. But at least we did, the head was back because the table, and people are using the table with the headpiece down like this because it feels better, doc. I don't like it when my head's back, that hurts. Well, and you go ahead and put them on the table and have their head like this, and now you're delivering the activator, you're gonna induce, well, gee, thanks a lot, I'll see you next week, doc. The head's forward, you don't wanna do that. You wanna use everything the activator people tell you to buy, you need to get. Everything the upper cervical people tell you to get, whether it be you wanna do their techniques as close to what the inventors, because the inventors were geniuses for all these techniques. and we come in and throw it all away and be real haphazard with what we're doing. You know, we need to pay attention to what the founders of these techniques did and respect that. All right, I'll give it a break today. Thank you. Go ahead and ring the bell. Subscribe if you can. This is fun. I'll try to keep doing this. My wife seems to like being out here in the sun, so I'll continue that too. God bless. Take care.